Hello, friends, and welcome to Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast. This is your host, Kira Drogue, signing on for another episode of exploration, adventure, fun, and, dare I say it, mystery. In today's episode, we'll chat with special guest Marilyn Greenwald and learn more about the mysterious Stratemeyer Syndicate, how Leslie McFarlane came to be involved with the Stratemeyer Syndicate, and get Marilyn's take on the edits to the Hardy Boys in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and what they meant for Leslie McFarlane and the Hardy Boys overall. Friends, it is an honor to be joined today by Marilyn Greenwald. Marilyn is an award-winning author and educator with a PhD in communication from Ohio State University. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and other national publications. She's the author of multiple books, including The Secret of the Hardy Boys, Leslie McFarlane, and the Stratemeyer Syndicate. Marilyn is a professor emerita in the University of Ohio's E.W. Scripps School of Journalism. All right. Well, Marilyn, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I am so incredibly excited about this conversation we're going to get to have.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking about Leslie McFarlane and the Hardy Boys and the series fiction. So,
I mean, my goodness, with a whole book on it, I would sure hope so. And that I'm curious actually as to where that interest in the Stratemeyer Syndicate kind of started, what your connection was to those books and what really brought The Secret of the Hardy Boys to life as an idea.
you know, it was fluky. I mean, before I tell you what happened, I did read the Nancy Drew books when I was growing up. Never read the Hardy Boys books, and my friend
Really?
But Nancy Drew, we read. You know, I had two girlfriends, and the three of us read them, and I liked them. I mean, I would be lying if I said, and they affected me for the rest of my life. No, they were okay. You know, I mean, they
They
were
were
okay.
a good book series you read when you were a kid.
Yeah, but I can't say, and that got me, interested in this. I mean, because that's not the case. What happened was, a couple years before I started to research, there was a column in the Washington Post by Gene Weingartner, and if you know him, he's no longer a columnist there, but he wonderful columnist, and he often wrote not humor columns, but funny things, you know. So he did a kind of a humorous column that he was in his cleaning up his attic one day, and he found these dusty old books, and they were serious, and they were the Hardy Boys, and oh my God, I remember those. You know, he's writing about this, and so Franklin W. Dixon is the author. He goes, "Well, I just said to myself, what happened? Where's Franklin W. Dixon? You know, what's he doing now? Or
Right.
did he have any kids? Or does he, And so he did a little research, and the whole point of the column was, well, A, there's no Franklin W. Dixon, and there never
He does
was.
not exist.
And B, so what's the story about this non-existent person? So he did the research, and he found out, of course, that was a pen name, and he did a little more research, and it was the pen name of a former newspaper reporter back in the 20s, or actually even before that, Leslie McFarlane. And Leslie McFarlane, without getting into it right now, was a Canadian newspaper reporter, and he wanted to make some extra money, so freelance writing. So he ended up writing some books. But anyway, so this columnist ended up finding out the name, doing research, and coming up with Leslie McFarlane, aka Franklin W. Dixon, his children, and they were grown. They were probably in their 60s at the time. And he talked to his daughter, Nora, and Nora, oh, Dad, my dad, yes, he wrote those books, and he got paid. He didn't get any royalties or anything for them. They got paid like $125 a book. And so this columnist fashioned this into kind of a funny column, funny and kind of bittersweet, like, this is, then he mentioned the Stratemeyers. Well, this is a guy who was responsible for series fiction, and he hired these people who had pen names, Carolyn Keene, many people know for the Nancy Drew stuff, and Franklin W. Dixon. But there was one line in that column that I thought, and he said that McFarlane from the time he was in his 20s to, I don't know, maybe his 50s, kept daily diaries of his life. And
Right.
he had kind of a rough life. He lived in, grew up in rural Canada, about it's a 3-hour drive from Toronto, up called
Yeah.
Haleyberry is called. And he was freelancing and he could barely make ends meet as a reporter. And he had a nice family that he loved, but it was just difficult because he really wasn't getting paid a lot for these books. But these
Mm-hmm.
diaries, I said, boy, if you could only get your hands on these diaries. And one thing led to another. I made some initial inquiries. I did call up Nora because her name was in the column, or I think I didn't
Mm-hmm.
call her. I think this was before the internet, but I think I wrote her. Anyway, and we can get into there were some initial problems getting the diaries, but ultimately I got them, and they were just really eye opening about the life of a writer and a life of somebody who freelanced. But what made it so weird was the whole Stratemeyer, and you're not you have a pen name, you only get paid per book, you don't get any royalties,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the long answer to questions. That's how I got interested in doing it.
That is so interesting because recently I was in Toronto, and actually my trip to Toronto was Sean Cassidy was playing in Toronto, and the Hardy Boys fan I am,
Yeah,
I had to go
yeah,
see that show.
yeah,
And let
yeah.
me tell you, I was the youngest one there by probably at least 40 years.
That's pretty funny because that was later, but it's interesting that you were, because I would thought because came onto it later, but nonetheless, yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny actually, the number of people that, like, as I'm trying to find my seat in this absolutely gorgeous theater, the number of people that are simultaneously being like, "Pardon me, miss, who I assume works here. You're going to tell me where I need to go, right?"
Yeah. That yeah. It sounds like a
And I
Seinfeld episode or something, but
right? I used to work at a concert hall, so I actually did end up directing people to their seats.
they were lucky, that
They're like, "Oh, perfect, thank you," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to go find my seat now."
Did you tell them not to
um,
bring in any soft drinks or anything in?
I should have. I should have made up some rules.
Yeah,
But outside of that being the purpose of the trip, I went to go to Hamilton, to McMaster, and to go see the archives and the Leslie McFarlane fonts that they have there, which was such an incredible experience. And hearing you talk about the diary, I mean, I could have spent days just sitting and reading through, and there's so much history and energy. And I have no idea how Leslie McFarlane managed to do anything other than write. Like, there was just so much. He was writing letters to his family, he was writing in his
right.
diary. I'm like, when did you have time for a sandwich, my friend?
Yeah. Although, he, like a lot of good writers, I'm betting he was a fast writer. I agree with you, but he was probably fast,
Oh,
he probably,
absolutely.
but yeah. Yeah. I mean, they were just starting to get cataloged when I did this research. So we did go to McMaster, and there were some, archives available, but it sounds like there's a lot more now. I mean, this was over 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Did you go
there
to the New
is.
York Public Library with the Stratemeyer? They did. I don't know if they still do. They did have the Stratemeyer papers there.
They still do. It is my dream trip. I would love to
Yeah.
just take a week at some point and just go and basically live in that library
Yeah.
in those files.
Yeah. Yeah. So that they did have a lot there, and I did use a lot from the New York Public Library.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a dream. I
There
love
you
it.
go. You get to ask the Canadian government, and then
Oh, yes. This is where more grant funding is going to come in. I see it. I see it happening. Um so let's talk a little bit about the Stratemeyer Syndicate. So, and this is something that I've referenced in previous episodes. I mean, I did one of my most recent episodes was actually chatting with Brian McFarlane, which
Oh,
was
good, yeah.
such a lovely man, such an absolutely
He
amazing
is.
experience.
He is.
And we
And
talked a little
Nora
bit
also.
about. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and Nora, as you know, is also lovely.
Yes. Yes, I'm hoping to get to chat with Nora as well. But we talked a little bit about the Stratemeyer Syndicate, but we never really got into what it is and how it functions. And I feel like of all of the people in the world who have an understanding of the Stratemeyer Syndicate, you probably are best positioned to really break it down. Can you tell us a little bit about the Stratemeyer Syndicate?
Yes. Okay. Now the Stratemeyer Syndicate, I'm only kind of laughing. It's a syndicate, whatever that is. But it's kind of it's a little bit of an ironic term because the Stratemeyer Syndicate, when it was founded by Edward Stratemeyer, and I think it was '06, it was like it might have been a one person, kind of office. It ended up being maybe a two-person office. And you get the impression that it was this complicated thing, which it never was.
Right.
Okay, but he called it that, and that's fine. And Stratemeyer was a writer and an editor, um, at the turn of the century, and a little bit before then. But he I was speaking about Stratemeyer's a couple years ago to a group, and I said, he was almost like these tech guys today in that he created something that made him a lot of money that nobody else came up with. And the reason that he did it is because he looked at the cultural landscape that was changing at the time, at the turn of the century, and he said, this is how it's changing, and this is what people need because of these changes. And what he saw, now he was a writer and editor, particularly that adults at the time were reading what were known as dime novels. They were kind of these cheap, in paperback, obviously small books. They were kind of geared toward the, I don't want to say lower class, but people who were, didn't read that much because they were working all the time, and they were a lot of times about detectives, maybe about westerns. But what really struck him was once we got child labor laws in the early 20th century, because before kids were working, children had
Mm-hmm.
a lot of spare time which they never had before. So he took his knowledge of these dime novels, and the fact that children now had a lot more spare time, and he came up with a series various series of books that were geared toward children and juveniles. And they, in some ways, resembled these dime novels. They were a little bit higher, in their standard, in their quality. But it was the fact that the American society was changing, particularly for children. They
Mm-hmm.
needed something to do, they needed something to read. So that's kind of the bare bones of the syndicate. He lived in New Jersey, and for, I think, most of the time he was alive and working with Leslie McFarlane. I think he did move the quote unquote syndicate to Manhattan. It was moved back when his daughters took over the syndicate and was moved back to New Jersey. But nonetheless, here he was. His whole thing was he would come up with these books that we now know are the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, et cetera, et cetera. He'd um, well, at the beginning, I'm sorry, he came up with a series, The Rover Boys, and this is where he got the idea.
Right.
He wrote them, and he followed exactly the same number of pages were consistent. Everything was consistent in these books. They were a group of books, and this way children would know what they were getting. So if you read one book, if you read the second book, it made reference to something that happened in the first book, and then it would kind of like tell you in a sentence or two, hey, this is what's going to happen in the next book. So he did it himself. He came up with the name of, he was Arthur M. Winfield. I'm not sure how he
Arthur
got.
M. Winfield.
I like
I
that
love
neat
it.
initial, and that's who he was. All right, that's who he became. He had a couple at the beginning. He had a couple publishers. I mean, he can't publish these himself, right? I mean, so
Right.
he did have to deal with some publishers. Um, so he did this, and then he decided, I guess, why am I writing these when I can
Right.
hire somebody to write these? He had one assistant, I think her name was Harriet Smith. He had, who helped him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but these two people made up the syndicate, the quote unquote syndicate. So then that's when he had the idea, I'm going to hire freelancers and I'll pay them X amount per book. Um, I'll give them an outline. So it's not like, hey, do this book, come up with whatever plot you want. Plot wise,
That would be a
here,
lot of freedom to give the writers.
yes. well, you can imagine what you get. So
Oh gosh.
he wanted them to strictly follow the outline. They weren't at the beginning. They weren't all that detailed, Then he had the characters. He would pay the freelancers by the book, and he would absolutely tell them, "No royalties. You're getting this flat fee for the book.
Yeah.
That's it." You know. So that's what he did, and it got to be gradually very successful in a pretty short time. And then he advertised for these freelance writers, also ghost writers, and that's how Leslie McFarlane found out about him. Stratemeyer placed an ad in a journalism publication, and it was called The Editor. And Editor and Publisher, I remember when I was a reporter, I read Editor and Publisher. It came out every week, but it's called The Editor. That's when McFarlane said, "Hey, somebody who needs a freelancer. I'm not making much money as a reporter, and I could use the money." And the rest is history. But that kind of it.
It really is. Like, that is so, oh my gosh, just the way that all came together. I'm I as a journalist for you, as a writer for me, thinking about these books have to be exactly 215 pages. I need X number of typeset pages. It blows my mind a little bit. I'm like, I'm trying to think about how I would love the challenge, but that's so incredibly specific, and that's got to be difficult.
Well, I don't want to, tell you in a minute how, details of McFarlane. And the Hardy Boys didn't come about until I think 3 years later, after
Mm-hmm.
Leslie started work. I guess it was a little less, but a year or so, 2 years after Leslie started working for him. But yes, and what happened was I read a lot of correspondence between McFarlane and Stratemeyer, and believe me, Stratemeyer didn't say, "Hey, make a 200 pages or 215 pages," and "Oh, you're a little off. That's okay." Oh, no, no, because he would in his letters he would tell McFarlane, "Well, you were a little short. You were 4 pages short." And I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't like, "Oh, you were 30 pages." I mean, it would be like a matter of pages. And this
Oh
was
my
kind of
gosh.
the theme with McFarlane. But yeah, so believe me, he didn't say that and not mean it. He meant it. And I think it got to, that's what he told the publisher, who published the books. "We're going to give you an exact number." So it was a domino thing, I guess. But yes, exactly the page, and he gave kind of rough outlines, and you had to follow these outlines. It wasn't like, "Well, I took a little liberty with the plot." I mean,
You
no.
do not take liberties with these
Yeah, well,
outlines.
yes, yes, you do not take liberty. So believe me, he was not nasty, but if you didn't follow, he let you know.
I behind me, so like this letter here, this is a copy of, because when I was in Toronto, I was so excited. I'm like holding the first letter that Stratemeyer ever sent Leslie McFarlane, being like, "This is such an important piece of Hardy Boys history." And the librarian came over and she's like, "I don't usually offer to do this, but you look really excited about this. Would you like a photocopy?" And I was like,
Oh,
"Yes, please."
that's a
I
good.
was
It's
like,
people
"I'm
who,
going to take this back and I'm going to frame it."
you know, isn't that the truth? People who work in archives, like me and you get that. That's like that is you get that. Like you're excited when you find something.
Right? It was so fun. But I just reading through that letter, I'm like, this man does not mince words. He's going to
Yeah,
tell you exactly what he thinks of something.
yeah, yeah. So, but that's how. But I do want to. When I was rereading my book, I had forgotten about this. Um, so and McFarlane's or Stratemeyer's not going to hire a pig in a poke. He's not going to go, "Well, this guy has a lot of journalism experience. Sure, let's have him write a book." He
Hmm.
gave him practice books to do, one
Right.
practice book. And what he did was there was a series called Dave Fearless, and Dave Fearless was a deep sea diver, and that was already existed. So he gave McFarlane. How did he do this? Oh, he gave him, I think, part of a Dave Fearless book that was already written. I think this is the way it was. And wait a minute, I'm sorry, I'm wrong about that. He gave him an outline for a Dave Fearless book and said, "Write half of this." I think that's what it is. I'll write a portion.
Okay.
Send it to me, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to pay him
Let's
unless,
see how this goes.
yeah. So he read McFarlane read some of the other Dave Fearless books, and then he wrote half of a Dave Fearless book. Then
Mm-hmm.
Stratemeyer said, "Yes, this works. If you want to finish it, I'll give you." I think it was $85 at that point. So he
Okay.
made the cut, and then he wrote a couple, and then I said, "Do you want to do another one?" Yes, do another one. And at this point, McFarlane was still working as a reporter, so he was working 8, 9 hours a day, and then he would come
Oh,
home.
yeah.
But if you read, I'm sure you probably have, and if you haven't read this, you should, and everyone should. Leslie McFarlane's autobiography, "The Ghost of the Hardy."
Such a dear, dear,
Yeah.
wonderful. I found a signed copy. The Red Deer Public Library has a signed
Oh,
copy of it.
that is good.
And I have never so seriously considered not returning a library book before in my
Yeah,
life.
you
My
yes, you
ethics
would have
won
gotten in
out.
trouble.
I did return the library book, but I very seriously considered
Yeah,
not
well,
returning
see,
that book.
I haven't seen one signed, but I loved it. And then this. So, and McFarlane is very funny. He can be, I don't want to say snide, but he knew he wasn't F. Scott Fitzgerald. He knew he was doing these children's books, and he did not like this deep sea diver date. Well, first of fortunately, there wasn't much dialogue. The dialogue was stilted, but fortunately, there wasn't because he was underwater all the time. And he read these books and he's like, "Oh my God, look at all these cliches." The ones that Stratemeyer sent him to model. He goes,
Oh,
"Look at these
yeah.
cliches." He goes, it's like, who wrote this? So he was very glad. I think he did 3 or 4 Dave Fearless. The last one I don't think ever was published. I don't remember, but he did a couple of them, and he said no one was happier than he was when that he didn't have to do that anymore. That series was discontinued. So the Dave Fearless, he got a lot of mileage out of kind of mocking Dave Fearless.
Whatever gets us to the Hardy Boys, man.
I did. Yeah, Dave Fearless. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that came right after he contacted Stratemeyer and said, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in working for you. What do I have to do?"
We got to write some books about deep sea divers. That's what we got to do. So then it was after that then that the Hardy Boys kind of came to be, and that he was like Edward Stratemeyer wrote the outlines, created the characters, gave a general sense of what these books would look like. But it was Leslie McFarlane who brought them to life, who gave those characters the energy and I'm like waving my
Yes.
hands,
Yeah.
going,
Yeah.
all of the amazing things that they are.
Yes. And what happened was, and just a little bit of background at this time, in the mid 20s, McFarlane was working as a reporter. And by the way, he I know it without even being there, he was a fast writer. Why? Because when he worked as a reporter, he had deadlines. He learned how to write fast.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
so that helped him. And then there were a lot of characters in the newsroom. There were a lot of characters in rural Ontario that he covered in the police beat. So he kind of had this newsman's kind of mentality, like people are a little crazy and weird, but and the atmosphere of the newsroom. But he was working there and he wasn't making much money. And what he started doing with the Day Fearless, he said, well, if I can come home from work, and if I work whatever, 2 hours, 3 hours a day for 3 days, I could get a book done. And he did the math. And he's thinking, well, if I do 3 books a month or 2 books a month, that'll get me X amount, and that's what I make as a newspaper reporter. So there was a lot of math, and hey, how much money can I make doing this on my own? And see, that's when
Right.
he ultimately did quit his job because as a reporter to do it full time. And I think one thing you have to remember that it's key about Leslie McFarlane, I don't think we've mentioned it. His goal in life was to be a serious magazine writer. That's what he did. Maclean's magazine,
Right.
this Harper's, which he wanted to write for those magazines. And they paid more. So that's what he was doing. So he had the newspaper job, which he kind of thought, well, I like it, but I don't want to do this the rest of my life. The Hardy Boys and series fiction, which he called the Juveniles, as he
The
referred to them.
juveniles.
And better than the Hardy Brats, which he also called, but that we'll get to that. But anyway, so
All right.
what he didn't want, his goal in life was to become a serious author. He has a letter from F. Scott Fitzgerald, which Nora showed him. It's his prized possession. He
Yeah,
wrote,
they have that at
yeah,
McMaster.
yeah. See, she has the actual copy, and I, the actual letter. I have a copy. But that's who he. I mean, I don't want to say he wanted to be F. Scott Fitzgerald, but that was who he was. He wanted to be a serious writer. So anyway, he did a couple. I don't even remember which ones. He did a couple more of the existing series. He didn't do the. I mean, Bobbsey Twins are very popular. What were popular are popular. I don't think he did
Hmm.
but people probably know that name. Tom Swift. I don't think he did Tom Swift, but that was an extremely popular
Oh, yes, it was.
um, extremely fast. He did a couple more. I don't remember what they were, but the point is, he does get a letter from Stratemeyer one day that says, "I'm starting this new series." It's Stratemeyer implied it was going to be very important. He said it's about these two teenage sleuths. They're teenage detectives. Um, I'm going. He said that instead of what was it, 200 pages or 215 pages, they're going to be 225 pages. So there was a little bit bigger.
A little
Um,
longer.
yeah, much to McFarlane's chagrin because he had
Yeah,
trouble with the
right.
pages. But anyway, so they were a little longer, and I think they weren't going to be. I think they were going to be cloth. They weren't going to be paperback, which is a big deal.
Right.
So, and he said, if you write these, I'll give you $100 a book instead of $85 a book. So Stratemeyer was saying right there, this is going to be a big deal, you know.
Hmm.
And he agreed to do it. And he said, I'll send you the outline with the characters, and he sent him the outline. And the thing about Stratemeyer, he wasn't super detailed in the he was with plot super detailed in the outlines. He had a sentence or two about each character, so that did give Leslie some latitude to
Right.
inject humor in the books, to inject, that's, as you just said, that's what it's all about. He put his personal stamp on those books. So what he did with the Hardy Boys is what he did with the other series fiction. He released three at a time. He called them the Breeders. Um, so he introduces the characters, and in the second book he refers passing what they did in the first book, and then he gives kind of, here's what's going to happen in the third book. Three of them are released at the same time. That had always worked for him, and that's what happened. And so McFarlane took that series, made it his own, and how many years later? I think he started. That was 26, and the books came out in 27. 20 years later, when McFarlane stopped writing the Hardy Boys. So that's
Jeez.
kind of the outline of what happened and how he got into writing the Hardy Boys.
It's so funny thinking about because I've seen I don't remember exactly, but it was like Frank Hardy, 16 years old, dark hair, like
Yes.
such a
Yeah.
short description. And then the characterization that came out of that. I think about Aunt Gertrude. Aunt Gertrude is like bar none my
Yes.
absolute
Yes.
favorite.
Very favorite.
And
Yeah.
in the energy that she brings. And anytime I talk about, and we'll talk about this at some point, but anytime I talk about the difference between the originals, I very loosely say the originals,
Yeah.
and the post 1959
Yeah.
versions, the originals and the bluebacks, I guess. Aunt Gertrude in the originals, glorious. She yells at Frank and Joe or she yells at Frank for 4 pages straight in What Happened at Midnight. And I hang on every word. I'm like, get it, Aunt Gertrude. Like, you have no
Right.
reason to be yelling at this poor teenage boy because you fell on the horn of the car. But like, get it, girl. And then you switch back to the bluebacks, and she says like 6 words, and they're all related to the plot.
Yeah. And what about the cops? I mean,
Oh, what about the cops?
yeah. Yeah. And what we're saying is McFarlane, wanted to instill in the readers, you don't always have to respect authority. Sometimes authority doesn't know what they're doing. So he made Collig and Smuff, and there was one other cop. He made them laughing stocks, to some degree. Or boy, the Hardy Boys could solve these mysteries that they couldn't. You know, they were the detectives and the policemen. And somebody once compared them to Keystone Cops. And I'm betting, without even knowing, in the rewrites, they probably were respectable
Oh,
figures.
they're distinctly more respectable. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting too, because wasn't there a point at which, like, when Stratemeyer's sending along the next outlines, he's providing feedback in his own very frank way and being like, this is too much.
Yes,
They
yes,
can't be that dumb.
yeah, yeah. In fact, it was Stratemeyer, right? Not the sisters, because I do remember, or not Harriet Stratemeyer who took it over, but I do
Mm-hmm.
remember that was, but he still kept them pretty, they weren't exactly the most respectable. You wouldn't want them
I
to
mean,
solve your own murder or anything, because they
it
wouldn't be able
it
to
would
do
be
it.
hard to have like a full 180 and like they're,
Yeah, yeah,
can't find their way out of the police station one day and they're out here
yeah,
solving
right.
crime like nobody's business
Yeah,
another
yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah.
But oh my goodness. So Edward Stratemeyer working with ghostwriters. So he had all of these different series that was happening. He had an honestly a goal in life. He had so many stories that he didn't have time to write them all himself. How many do you know by chance, like how many ghostwriters he would have at at any given time? Because I mean, like I think about all of the feedback that he's providing Leslie McFarlane and reading through all of these manuscripts and, oh, this is 4 and 3/4 pages too short, I want you to add stuff here, here, and here to make it long enough. How many different authors was he doing that for?
The quick answer is that I honestly don't know. However, um, what he wanted, and you probably know this just studying it, he wanted a strong stable of writers.
Right.
He wanted the same people, a because he knew them and he knew their strengths and weaknesses. But what's more important is if a ghostwriter kept writing the series, he or she probably wouldn't make a mistake. So let's say you make a you take over the Hardy Boys, and this actually happened when McFarlane wasn't writing it. Obviously somebody else had to do it, and there were a
Mm-hmm.
couple of mistakes. This was way after Stratemeyer died, and his daughter's slash daughter took it over. They made some mistakes. I guess Laura Hardy, the Hardy Boys mom,
Yeah.
was referred to as Mildred at one point. I mean, that's a big mistake.
That
And
I don't know how you mess that. I mean, I do know how you mess that up. She doesn't really
yeah,
play a very central role in these books,
but
but
to
that's
get the
still a
name
pretty big
wrong.
mistake.
And there were a couple others that I read about, and there were a couple more minor ones. But the answer, I don't know how many he dealt with, but he really, really wanted a group, ghostwriters that he knew. And you understand why. Another kind of real interesting part of this is, I like to say that Stratemeyer um, discovered branding. We talk about brands now. It's a big kind of, 2025 term, they were branding. He really discovered brands, and that's why he wanted you ask, well, why didn't he have these people write them under their own name? Because he wanted the readers to say Franklin W. Dixon 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. He's the same guy, Carolyn Keene. um, so the brand name author was so important to him, and he wanted his readers to think that these were real people. And we laugh
Yeah.
now, especially with the internet. It's like, yeah, like that would never fly today. It did fly. And um, his daughter told me that, I don't want to say lived in fear, but McFarlane was very concerned with the fact that people would, discover that he's writing these books. He didn't want, because he was afraid that if it got out, well, there's nobody named Franklin W. Dixon. That's Leslie McFarlane. Because Stratemeyer did not want that. And
I
I
was
don't
gonna
think
say then the syndicate's gonna come after him.
well, and the real syndicate, yeah. But yeah, he never signed anything. It wasn't like, oh, he could get sued, but he was somewhat paranoid. McFarlane was that people would find out it was Franklin W. Dixon. And there's all kinds of
Jeez.
anecdotes, like Brian McFarlane, and he may have told you this, and I think this was in Leslie's autobiography. I don't know, it was 12, 13, 14. The Hardy Boy books were in their house because when he wrote one, Stratemeyer sent him the book. Oh, Dan,
Hmm.
did you ever read these? And of course, McFarlane goes, well, actually, I wrote them. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, he was old. It wasn't like he was 7 years old, but can you imagine that? And then at that point, I think he said, I think Brian was old enough that Leslie said, but you can't tell people, et cetera, et cetera. So he was
Yeah.
branding all these, and Nancy Drew. We think of Nancy Drew, Carolyn Keene. That's who wrote Nancy Drew through the years. So that's why he came up with these pen names that were very sacred to him as far as keeping them, you know, having them live on, I guess, rather than people saying, "There's that guy doesn't exist, that woman does not exist." So yeah, that's the thing. The ghostwriters were the backbone. Now, the Stratemeyers did have to deal with Gross and Dunlap was one of the main. Now I'm starting to talk like Leslie McFarlane because Nora told me how he in later life he referred to them as the Hardy Brats, which I thought
I
was
don't
like,
know that those two got into enough, like, and I'm going to say, like, quote unquote, brat trouble to be brats.
well,
They were upstanding well, okay. The blueback version of the Hardy Boys were very law abiding and upstanding citizens. They were less so in the originals, which makes it a lot more fun and also makes Hardy Brats probably more accurate.
well, back then. Oh, and then this. Um, McFarlane said, I did not want to write down to kids. I didn't, they're very smart. You can't write down to them. So he used
Yes,
multi-syllable words. He made passing reference occasionally to Dickens, to Shakespeare. And that
he
was key
did.
too, which I don't know. I think most of those, I don't know. You might know more than I do about this. Were most of those taken out in the rewrites? Yeah.
A
Yeah.
good amount of those disappeared because in lots of cases that was in relation to, the odd time that the boys actually went to school
Yeah.
or and
Yeah.
lots of those specific moments were cut to add more action and adventure to keep up with, kids and lowered attention spans and television
Yeah,
by
well, and then there's
the
television,
late
which
50s.
didn't exist when he started the series. Um, so there was this guarding of the pen names. We can't let those out. And then there's so many aspects of this. Then there's the issue of the money you get paid per book, and one thing that Nora and Brian told me, throughout the years, once it was revealed that Franklin W. Dixon was Leslie McFarlane, people asked him, well, I hope you sued. Did you sue to get the royalty? He said, well, he got that a lot. Well, you should sue because these books have sold millions and
Right.
well, that he did sign something that when he was, in his 20s, the ghost
Mm-hmm.
did sign. But, he said that Brian and Nora said, my dad wasn't like that. He signed it. It was a legal document. He wasn't going to try to get out of it. He never
Yeah.
that step, but they laugh because they go, wow, can you imagine, the money they
Oh
would.
my gosh. Yeah, like there's so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So and then there's the issue, and I'm sure you've come across of I don't want to say censorship, but librarians saying this isn't real literature, we're not going to carry it. There was in I believe it was 35 or the mid 30s, there was a big story in Fortune magazine which revealed the Stratemeyer Syndicate, and it said there's this thing called the Stratemeyer Syndicate, and these aren't real people. And that was huge,
Oh,
and
I believe it.
it had negative overtones. It wasn't just saying, "Oh, this is interesting. They don't have these real people. These are pen." No, it was kind of like this.
They are controlling the minds of our youth.
Yeah, yes, and I guess they compared Stratemeyer to Rockefeller because he had this big. Well, that was a little
Oh
bit,
my gosh.
but they were saying, "See, look what he's doing. He's making all this money on these kids' books." So that was a huge deal at the time. And of course there's the rewrites, which I'm sure you probably want to get to. But so there was a lot of drama with these series.
I mean, it's I love a good little bit of drama. But that's just, you think about all of the pieces that go into this. Because I can't imagine there was that much drama bringing The Secret of the Hardy Boys to life. I mean, it's a very different circumstance, of course, but I feel
Yeah.
like it is important to note that not every book or not every book series has that level of history and, dare I say it, mystery,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
living beneath the surface. And
Yeah.
that it's one of the things that makes the Hardy Boys really interesting to explore, because
Right.
it's more than just, here is a Hardy Boys book. It's more, it's so much more, because there's so much you can learn about the way the publishing industry works. Because, like you're saying, Stratemeyer's setting up this absolutely fascinating structure that churned out millions of books in a way that hadn't been done before.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to overuse the word genius, and I don't know if he was or wasn't, but he certainly was creative and smart, and it was an invention. It was like any other invention that had, really changed things and changed an industry, you know.
Oh, absolutely. He continued his work basically up until the day he died. And then I'm like, I'm hearing American Pie, the day the music died, in the back of my head. But once he died, I have very much enjoyed that you've said his daughters, and then always been like, well, actually just the one. But when, that leadership shifted over to Harriet Adams, and I guess the tone of conversation between Leslie McFarlane and the Stratemeyer Syndicate changed a lot, because there was a lot of, from what I understand, a lot of mutual respect between Leslie McFarlane and Edward Stratemeyer. Like, Edward Stratemeyer was like, I hear you had a child. Congratulations. I hear you got married. Here's an extra $25.
Right.
Congratulations. Have fun
And
on
the
your
wedding,
honeymoon.
yeah, and the kid and the wedding present and a a small Christmas bonus. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that change when Harriet Adams took over?
It's a tough question. I mean, I think that there was a quasi paternal thing going on. I mean, I think that, Leslie was so young and Stratemeyer was old enough to be his father. And I do think there was that vein in their correspondence. Stratemeyer was kind of formal, but and you probably realize, you could read in the correspondence, he was getting a little less formal. And
Oh,
they
absolutely.
worked together for 4 or 5 years. And by the end, they were saying, well, you should come and visit. And they never visited each other, they never met. But there was this, you should come and visit. And near the end, when Leslie McFarlane did, get something published in a real magazine, or he was excited because he actually, got some award or some freelance article published, he would tell Stratemeyer in a letter, and Stratemeyer would say, "Congratulations." I mean, it was very
That's
nice.
so sweet.
Yeah, it was it was professional, but it got a little bit more personal. How did it change? It's hard to say. I just think that, no, it wasn't. I don't think that McFarlane was telling them that much that was personal as far as the daughters. But you understand it. It was, the whole relationship was different. It wasn't the
Oh,
father
yeah.
thing. But I mean, I found the letters perfectly fine. I found the outlines from the daughters, and we say daughters, Harriet and Edna. Edna kind of dropped out after a while, and for much of the time it was Harriet. I found the outlines to be more detailed. Uh, yeah,
Interesting.
it seems to me, and I didn't look at all of them. It seems to me they actually were more divided more into chapters. I just remember going through those and saying, as far as the plot, they're either more detailed or they give the appearance of being more detailed, maybe because they were divided into chapters.
Right.
That I do remember. Um, but like their father, the Stratemeyer daughters, they would often get letters from McFarlane going, well, I think this is going to be the last book I write because I'm never. And then well, I guess I am going to write more books. And then, well, I think I'm being successful now and I won't need to write these books. Well, I am going to write these. So there was a lot of that going on. and every once in a while he would ask for an advance, and
Right.
which I believe the daughters gave him too, because he would ask an advance for Edward, and I think he did sometimes ask for an advance with the daughters too. So it changed just because the whole way they viewed each other, I think, changed. And
Oh,
Evan was
absolutely.
older. He wasn't 25 anymore, or 26,
Right.
when he dealt with them. So, but you got to give the Stratemeyers credit. They kept that up, I believe, till 1980. The quotes
Yeah,
that,
until the syndicate sold.
yeah. I mean, kudos to them. That's a long time.
And that's Harriet Adams dealt with so much as as the leader of the Stratemeyer Syndicate. Like I think about that editorial rehaul, revamp, whatever we want to call it, when those
Yeah,
first 38 books were in a lot of cases completely rewritten.
yeah,
And lots of that, from my understanding, landed on her plate,
yeah, yeah.
which is I have so many things to say about this editorial revamp because you throw out the word censorship earlier, and there's a lot that you can tie into that.
Yeah, and we could give a little background in the rewrites. In '59, the Stratemeyer said, well, we're going to have to rewrite whatever the term is. We're looking into all these books, these series, because times have changed, and it's true. But what they were really saying, there was some racist terms in there that back in
There
'59
sure
were
were.
not acceptable anymore. Um, and I think what they wanted to make them what more PC, and that wasn't a term. Politically correct wasn't a term then, but that's what they wanted to do. And yeah,
Right.
they sure were. I mean, there was somebody from China, and he referred to as evil yellow face. I mean, they were by today's standards pretty racist, and you know, um, the chums, the boys. One of them was Jewish, one of them
Yeah.
was Italian, and the Italian, I think his father or something, he's talking in a dialect, in like an
There was
Italian.
a lot of talking in dialects.
Yeah, and with black people too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess they said, okay, we've got to change this. But ultimately, they were shortened, and as you have said, sentences were simplified. A lot was taken out, and that has been somewhat controversial because, on one hand, yes, maybe do you want to keep that other stuff in? Yellow Chinaman. I don't know. Maybe not. But what was really rough, I think, was just shortening the books. And in my book, I talk about an interview that Leslie McFarlane did when he was in his 70s with
Mm-hmm.
Toronto Star magazine, and the author said, "Hey, let me show you these books as they were rewritten." And he gave Leslie some examples, and Leslie was shocked. He did not know that they were rewritten. He did not know that a lot of his, language, his references to Shakespeare were taken out. And his quote was, "Well, my God, they've been gutted." So that was revealing to him, and he didn't find that out till relatively late in his life. But it's still, I did if you remember a couple years ago, the Dr. Seuss books. I
Yeah.
think Dr. Seuss airs. So we, some of these have racist overtones. We're not going to have them published anymore, and that stirred a big brouhaha. In fact, I did a column for the Wall Street Journal comparing the Dr. Seuss brouhaha to the Hardy Boys, what happened then, and I'm not saying, oh, they shouldn't have, but it is something to talk about, especially if children that read, what do you think, should they have been changed, should they have been changed not as much. And then there's the whole issue, and you can probably talk about this more, of the rewrites and getting the original. Where can you get the original books, and do you
The
even
original
own?
books are so difficult to find, and interestingly, people think they're worth a lot more than they actually are.
Oh, is that right? Because people would ask
Oh,
me about that, and I really have no idea,
there people are out here selling them for like 40, $50 a book. And I'm like, my friends, like I'm especially the ones like No Dust Jacket. They're like, oh,
Right,
this
right,
is an
right.
original. And I'm like, it's not even red, guys.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's been interesting. Like I've found most of my collection at like secondhand stores
Yeah.
and people in my life who have been going through their basement and found some dusty Hardy
Yeah.
Boys books and been, Kira wants these.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, yes, Kira does, please, anytime. But it's holding those, like particularly the ones where plots changed and like a significant portion of the story, if not the entire story, was different. Holding those two books, in your hands and realizing just how different they are is such an interesting experience. Like, I think back to reading the first time I got to read an actual Leslie McFarlane Hardy Boys book. And I keep talking about how I got to meet my heroes all over again, la da 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 da. But it was such a different experience because as much as Leslie McFarlane talks about, the Hardy Brats and the juveniles and,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you can tell that he put a lot of energy and effort
Yeah.
and care into these
Yeah.
characters and these books and these stories. And he brought a lot of influence from his own life.
Yes.
In
That
there's
is.
always these big, grand, wonderful meals and
Yeah.
celebrations with friends. And, they're out teasing each other and running amok and, you know,
Right.
doing the things that children do. And to see all of that disappear, I can't imagine what that would feel like as a writer. Like even without, having the rights to it or whatever that looked like,
Yeah.
that's still like a significant portion of his life that just kind of got rewritten.
Yeah. No, and I mean, like all professionals, he took pride in what he did. If it was the juveniles, or yeah, he was a writer. He had pride in that, and he wasn't going to turn in crap. I think that's why he kind of laughingly talked about the Dave Fearless, because he looked at
Yeah.
these are kind of bad, but they want me to do them. All right. Oh, I have a quote that I remember that I quoted in my books. Well, I have to write. I have to write them. That doesn't mean I have to read them. Or I mean, it was like and he was so glad when he didn't have to write those anymore. Um, so yeah, that's what a writer does. Even when he worked for the newspaper, he covered fires, he covered crime, but they were always well written, and he always gave it 100%. Or it seemed like he did.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that again, that care is just so, and not even just the care for the characters and the care for the stories, but the care for the readers really comes through in those
Yeah, that
original
was his.
books in a way that doesn't necessarily in those bluebacks, because he's encouraging readers to think critically and think outside the box and challenge what they're being told and question their own abilities, but also try new things. Like,
Yeah.
they're really empowering in a sense.
One
But
of
it's
his favorite
also,
quotes
oh, sorry, go
is,
ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say, as what you're saying, one of his favorite quotes is, I think boys in particular like running to the dictionary. You know, they like
Yeah.
seeing a word they don't know what it is. They like finding out what it means. You know,
They want to learn something new. Exactly. And I mean, it's so interesting, this conversation about the editorial revamp, rewrite, the repackaging, whatever you want to refer to that as. It brings up a lot of really fascinating questions. I've been really lucky. I've gotten to present at a number of conferences across Canada, the US, and Germany, actually,
oh wow,
talking about that editorial revamp and what it means for historic children's literature that's being presented in a modern day. Because I mean, the centennial anniversary of the Hardy Boys is coming up in 2027. We've
I didn't
got,
realize that till it emailed me about this. I thought, oh my god, 26, 26. I had not realized that until I thought about it after I
it's
got.
coming up so
Yeah,
quickly. And,
yeah,
there's these stories that are coming into public domain,
right.
and you're
I read that
looking
one.
at, there's all of these different pieces. But in lots of cases, there is, you know, what would bringing these books back look like? Would they be the originals? Would they be the blueback books? There's still like a good significant portion of the population that doesn't realize that the Hardy Boys books that they read as kids aren't the same ones that were originally published. And we live in a society now where it's a lot easier to hop on Twitter and be like, hang on, Frank and Joe aren't the Frank and Joe I remember from when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
yeah.
But you couldn't do that in the late 50s and early 60s
Right,
when these changes were
right,
happening. Like, it was really easy to, slide that under the rug under
right.
the guise of, oh, we're going to, these books are blue now. Look at them. They're so pretty.
Yeah.
Don't look as
That's the
closely
truth.
at what's inside.
Well, that's why Leslie McFarlane didn't know. I mean, he would have found out on the internet probably, if it existed then. But that you're absolutely right. Do you know? I mean, there was some place called Applewood Books when I was writing my book. Do they
Yes.
still exist, or didn't they publish the originals or
They did. They did some
republished?
facsimiles or facsimiles, however you pronounce that word, of the originals. I have a couple of them in my collection. And they are like, as far as I can tell, I have to caveat that, as far as I can tell, to a T, very close to those first editions in terms of binding, oh my gosh, the dust jackets, that's the word I'm looking for,
Yeah.
the storyline, and it very clearly, like, as you remember them, written by Leslie McFarlane. Here's, and
Uh,
it doesn't even Franklin W. Dixon, like, the originals written by Leslie McFarlane as you remember them. And they're super, super interesting. They did, I want to say, the first like 16 ish, but
yeah.
they're super fascinating to have as well, because again, it's close to the original. It's what it might have looked like, but it's again this bringing it to life in a new way. And that brings up questions about, who's making the decisions about what
Yeah.
gets published, who's
Yeah.
who's making the decisions about what kids are reading. Like, should it be a parent's decision as to whether little Tommy gets an original Hardy Boys book or an edited version? Should, because there's very little rules in the publishing industry about
Yeah.
what that looks
Especially
like,
kids. Yeah.
especially with the syndicate having all of the
Yeah.
rights. Like, they didn't have to consult anybody. They could just do. And there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of power in that.
That's why I think librarians, some of them got really upset. I was reading, wow, they did it. All right, you don't like the books, but I mean, they're librarians, but still, they get so rabid about it, and when that Fortune article came out, and it was, these people don't even exist, Franklin W. Dixon
Yeah.
doesn't. I mean, you're thinking, whoa, whoa, yeah. I mean, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just some nice little article. It got people angry, and I think it was meant to get people angry, you know.
Well, and there was at points, but like, I guess immediately ish preceding all of the changes to the Hardy Boys series, they were being banned. Like,
Yeah,
this was an
yeah.
early example of book banning and being decreed as, this is one of my favorite quotes, decreed as being as dangerous to children as alcohol and narcotics.
Which is ironic, isn't it? Because there was no sex in the book. And there was no real
Right?
violence. There was no blood or anything. I mean, when you think about it, it wasn't even close to. I mean, there's not even any blood in the, even a little amount, and yet they're, you know, they're so quote unquote dangerous. I mean, it's just ironic.
Well, exactly. And I mean, oh gosh, there's there's no answers either. Like, there's
And
lots of discussion to be had around it, and that's
yeah,
one of the reasons that I love The Secret of the Hardy Boys so much, is
yeah,
because it brings up all of this history, and it shares all of these stories in such a really powerful and authentic way. Like, I finished reading this and I felt like Les was one of my friends. I'm like, I feel like I
good.
know you now.
Well, because of the
And
diaries, right? I mean,
exactly.
you know, those were really revealing, and good for him. I mean, he wanted them to be revealing. That's why you keep a diary, you know.
Yeah. And I
Um,
mean, it's a good portion of his legacy too.
yeah,
What he's bringing forward, because now we get to see all of this history from his eyes.
yeah, yeah. It's funny because when I wrote the column for the Wall Street Journal, I said pretty much what you did. I didn't say, well, then they should be rewritten. They shouldn't be rewritten. I said this should be discussed. Elements of who decides what children read, and why or why not should we change these books. And somebody in the internet, there's
Oh,
responses to come. And
of
actually,
course.
I can't complain. Most of them were good, but one person wrote, well, I read this, and because it was the Wall Street Journal, And I expected the writer to say, "How dare you rewrite these books? This is the worst thing you could do." And it was pretty even-handed, and I appreciate that. So this person expected me, because it was a Wall Street Journal, to say, "That's
Hmm.
censorship. What are you?" And I'm not saying I think that way or don't think that way, but the purpose of it was this should be discussed. That's,
Absolutely.
you know. But it was I was kind of chuckling when when I read that response.
It's the amount of people that expect journalists to come out and be like, this is my strong opinion one way or the other. It
Right,
always
right,
surprises me.
right.
I don't.
Part of it, they're getting it from all these there's a lot of opinion on CNN and MS, well, MS now, I guess. There's a lot of opinion, and people get bombarded with opinions, so they kind of forget what journalism is, that it's not opinion. That's what I think
Right?
is going on, you know. They can't tell a difference anymore, and I don't blame them. I mean, look what they're exposed to, you know.
Exactly. It's hard. And I mean, so you teach and you teach in and around the realm of journalism, correct?
Yeah, journalism. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're teaching, how are you handling that with, with the next generation of journalists?
Well, and I retired about 5 years ago, but we still had a lot of opinion, going.
Mhm.
Um, it's hard. You talk about it a lot. I guess that helps. I mean, my students, most of them were very good. I mean, I have to say, and I was lucky. But you talked about it, and then when you had examples of in opinion in a story, either a published story or something one of the students did, you brought it up and go, so what is this? Is this opinion? Is it objective? And objectivity is kind of a tough concept. It sounds like it's
It
easy,
is.
but it's tough. So we talk about, what is objectivity. But they're getting bombarded with that stuff on TV there. And they read a lot of reviews, of
Mhm.
records. And that you do have to have opinion. And it just muddies the water, and it's a very confusing kind of thing. It was much I taught for a long time. The first 10 years, I taught for over 30 years. The first 10 years it
Wow.
wasn't nearly as difficult. You had a lot of newspapers, CNN was around, but it was in its infancy. It was a much easier environment to teach the difference between objectivity and opinion. I mean, and you didn't even have to really teach it that much. But then as time has gone on, yeah, it's much more difficult.
That is so, so interesting to me. And just all the ways that this all ties back together, like journalist looking at newspaper writer, like it all ties together so beautifully. And I've said it before and I will say it again. I'm so grateful for the time and effort and energy and conversations that went into The Secret of the Heart. I keep looking over at it. It's my like, ah.
So
But
that's
I'm so grateful for the care that you gave it,
oh,
and
well, that's
just
very nice.
it got the best treatment, and it really brought Les's story back into the forefront, and I
Thank you.
think a
And
way that
my
he would be really
publisher,
proud of.
the publisher, which a lot of times I've worked for various publishers, they keep you from doing things they don't. It was a wonderful publisher. I had a wonderful editor,
Oh, good.
In fact, the editor who was in charge of the press, but the line editor, the copy editor I had was wonderful, and she was Canadian, just weirdly. I mean, just a coincidence. She was Canadian, but she was a wonderful editor, you know. So it all came together, and I can't say that it was just me, because the press and the editors there were great.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And it sounds like having, Nora and Brian and other folks that
yes.
knew Leslie and getting to talk
Oh,
about
they're
him
so
and their
wonderful.
relationships, and
Yeah.
you
You
can
can see, I
tell.
mean, you knew what a great guy he was, and then when you meet those two, Nora and Brian, you say, well, anybody who was the father of these guys was probably, you get it now.
Absolutely.
Um, so anyway, well, my hat's off to you. Your knowledge of the subject is so extensive. Good for you. I mean, I think sometimes we get into something briefly, we go on to something else, and we don't get a lot of the details. But you really do. You really have done a lot of the legwork, and you really are knowledgeable about the subject. So
Huh? Thank you.
Yeah.
There's so much to explore, and it's such, like, the Hardy Boys are such a household name that
Yeah.
being able to use them to explore different pieces of industry and history and publishing
Yeah.
it's so much fun because, I mean, if you ask me, and not, well, actually more people do nowadays, but there are very few things that you can't tie back to the Hardy Boys in some way, shape, or form. And
Yeah.
it's really fun getting to draw all of those connections and chat with the most wonderful people like you.
Oh, well, that's very, very sweet. So, all right. Well, thank you. Thanks for your interest in this and, great questions. And, it's been lots of fun for me. It was lots of fun to reread that book. And like I said,
I'm so
I looked
glad.
at portions of it sometimes when somebody wanted an interview, but I never read it start to finish since it first came out, So,
Aw, well, I'm glad to have sparked that, and I hope it brought you some joy.
yes. So,
Amazing. Well, thank you again. I'm so grateful for your time, and this was perfect. I'm running out of words. I'm just like, I'm so
great.
happy. I'm
Great.
beaming.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been such fun chatting with Marilyn Greenwald, and I want to take a moment to thank her again for her time, energy, and expertise. Until next time, this is Kira Drogue, host of Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast, signing off. The absolutely stunning original theme music you've just enjoyed was composed by Jeff Lee. Sleuth Studies is grateful for the support of Volunteer Alberta, the Canadian Red Cross, the GloCal Foundation of Canada, and the Government of Canada. For more information about Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast, please visit www.sleuthstudies.ca or find us on social media @Sleuth Studies.